Hello and welcome to Then and Now, a conversation with Hosea. My name is Derek Hovind. I'm the pastor at Salem Lutheran Church in Orlando, Florida. And for about 26 days or so, we are reading through the whole book of Hosea, reflecting a bit on Hosea's context and then putting some questions before ourselves from the prophet's words to the original hearers. We've been in a stretch, chapter 8 and 9, the last few days that have really focused on some of the accusations against the people in the northern kingdom of Israel. And today we will read the first half or so of chapter 10, which continues some of that same criticism. Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. The more his fruit increased, the more altars he built. As his country improved, he improved his pillars. Their heart is false. Now they must bear their guilt. The Lord will break down their altars and destroy their pillars. For now they will say, "We have no king, for we do not fear the Lord. And a king, what could he do for us?" They utter mere words. With empty oaths they make covenants. So litigation springs up like poisonous weeds in the furrows of the field. The inhabitants of Samaria tremble for the calf of Bethaven. Its people shall mourn for it, and its idolatrous priests shall wail over its glory that has departed from it. The thing itself shall be carried to Assyria as tribute to the great king. Ephraim shall be put to shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his idol. Samaria's king shall perish like a chip on the face of the waters. The high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. Thorn and thistle shall grow up on their altars. They shall say to the mountains, "Cover us," and to the hills, "Fall on us." This chapter 10, these first 8 verses, really move through some extraordinary time, a time of prosperity to a time where that prosperity is no longer there. If you recall, early on, we talked about a series of kings and chaos and leadership, a time of a Syro-Ephraimitic war that leaned on the kingdom. But before that, there was a time of prosperity. And what we hear in the early verses of this is that there was a time when Israel was a luxuriant vine and that their fruit was increasing, that they were able to build altars and pillars. Now, we find out later that these altars and pillars were to other gods, but there was a time where prosperity was present, and the people responded to that prosperity by trying to build holy places. James Lindberg would maybe have us reflect on the ways that is a part of our journey as people of faith. All through Scripture, we find times where people stop and build an altar because they've had an encounter with God in that place. And even in our own worship spaces, right, there are baptisms and weddings and marriages and struggles that we bring into these places, and they become sacred and holy to us, and we have encounters with God to where those places become important. And in the prosperity of the people of Israel, what we find in this 10th chapter is that they built these altars, and they did sort of see in their prosperity some sense of God being present, but the prophet would tell us their hearts were false, and they built the wrong altars and the wrong pillars, and lived into moving away from the covenant as opposed to really seeing God's presence. That's a theme all the way through Hosea thus far. The result then, in the time where prosperity is no more, is that their altars are going to get torn down. There's a note in verse 4 that litigation springs up like poisonous weeds, so the people are turning against one another. Their false worship is going to get carried off to Assyria, and those political alliances that they have sought are going to bring shame to the people. And the king shall perish, and the monarchy is going to come to an end. The priests are idolatrous. All of this is an indication that the times of prosperity when they were building altars to these false gods have now come to an end. And the prosperity being gone, they now no longer have a connection to the covenant with God that would help them live through that time. And so things are getting bad quickly. If we think then about our present context, I wouldn't liken our building of worship spaces to the building of false idols and altars to false gods, but we certainly do in our times of prosperity as communities of faith build worship spaces to find connection with God as we go along. COVID has been an interesting time where all of the prosperity we might have celebrated has been challenged, whether that's the economic prosperity that's fallen apart in our communities, spiritual or relational prosperity where we have thrived in connection as communities, and even the use of the physical church spaces that we have built in the past as a place where we feel connected to God. And so I think what the prophet can put before us a question today is how we live in that tension when that time of prosperity is gone and when we have these physical worship spaces. What is it that we are called into, and how are we called to live when times are challenging, and how does that call us to the covenant relationship that we get with God through all of the promises that come through Scripture? And to reflect on those tensions, right? That the building is important, but it's not the main thing, and that our faith journey has had times of prosperity and times of struggle. Again, as with every day, these questions are difficult ones to answer, and this one lives in the tension of the places that we hold dear, but the struggles that have come with these seasons that we've been living through together as people of faith. So I hope that the prophet can speak soon a word of hope into these places where we're reflecting on the shame and the struggle and the failure, but that we will soon turn the corner into some hopeful words of the prophet. But until then, I do invite you to dwell in some reflection on the ways that prosperity leaving puts us in places of struggle and how we look for God amidst that. Thank you for joining me for here on day number 19. We'll continue tomorrow with the rest of chapter 10.